Have you ever stopped to wonder why the people you love the most can hurt you the deepest? Why the ones you go out of your way for, the ones you sacrifice for, the ones you protect with your silence, are the very ones who turn your kindness into a weapon? You were taught to be good. Trained to believe that if you give enough, love enough, forgive enough, the world will soften. That people will reciprocate. That your value lies in how much of yourself you're willing to give away. But Machiavelli didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in reality. And his reality was cold, sharp, and honest. If you choose to be good among wolves, you will become food. In other words, if your goodness isn't guarded by discernment, it will be devoured by those who see your compassion not as virtue, but as vulnerability. Most people won't harm you with fists. They'll harm you with expectations. They'll take what you give, then ask for more. And when you finally say no, they'll call you selfish, cold, changed. Not because you wronged them, but because you've stopped letting them use you. Machiavelli understood the currency of power. He wrote not for saints, but for survivors. And he warned, it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. Not because love is weak, but because love without strength becomes dependence. And dependence is always a liability. If you've ever been the man who always answers, always explains, always smooths over the tension, then you haven't been valued, you've been predictable. And in a world ruled by psychology, predictability is a death sentence to respect. They know you'll pick up when they call. They know you'll come when they cry. They know you'll explain when accused. And they don't respect you for it. They expect it. That's why Machiavelli didn't admire the agreeable man. He admired the sovereign one. The man who knows when to speak and when to vanish. The man whose kindness is a choice, not a compulsion. The man who offers love, but never at the expense of his own self-command. Let's make it plain, your need to be understood is being weaponized. Your desire to be seen as good is being exploited. Because people don't need to hate you to hurt you, they only need to believe you won't fight back. Every time you say yes when your body says no, you abandon yourself. Every time you explain to someone who's already decided to misunderstand you, you weaken your authority. Every time you show up out of fear they'll be disappointed, you teach them that their approval is more sacred than your peace. Machiavelli would call that weakness dressed as nobility. And he would not praise it. He would tell you this instead, he who becomes predictable becomes replaceable. Let that burn. Let it purge the part of you that believes love should hurt. That peace requires self-erasure. That being needed is the same as being valued. It isn't. You think your silence is maturity, but silence without boundaries is submission. You think you're the bigger person, but the bigger person doesn't bleed for people who won't even hand them a bandage. The bigger person walks away and builds a life where their worth is not up for debate. Machiavelli would have admired that man. Not because he is cruel, but because he is clear. Crystal clear about what he gives and who is allowed to receive it. Because when you're always available, you are never rare. When you're always explaining, you are never sovereign. And when you're always kind without discretion, you are not noble, you are naive. And what they won't tell you is this, they don't fear losing your love. They fear losing their grip on you. They don't miss you. They miss their ability to summon you. To extract your attention, your care, your energy, on demand. That is not love. That is ownership. And Machiavelli's greatest lesson is that to be owned is to be conquered. But you are not here to be conquered. You are not here to be soft enough for everyone to lean on until you collapse. You are not here to be understood by people who refuse to understand themselves. You are not here to bleed for approval. You are here to command yourself. To choose silence when it gives you strength. To choose absence when your presence is taken for granted. To choose power, not the noise that pretends to be peace. So the next time you feel pulled into an old pattern, explaining, justifying, proving your intentions, don't. Stop. Breathe. Step back. And remember, you cannot be hurt by what no longer has access to you. Let that be your code. And if these words ring true, if something deep in your chest just exhaled for the first time in years, then carve this into your identity: my kindness is no longer a weapon they can use against me. Because nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again, once you realize you were the gatekeeper all along. There is a lie you've been taught since childhood, repeated so often it feels like truth: be dependable, and you will be respected. Be loyal, and people will value you. Be available, and you'll never be alone. But Machiavelli would laugh at that. Because in his world, the real world, the one not governed by hope but by strategy, by power and perception, he saw the opposite. The man who is always available is never respected. He is used. He is expected. And then he is discarded. Let this land. Predictability is not virtue. Predictability is control in disguise. The more they can anticipate you, the less they respect you. They text, and you answer. They disappear, and you wait. They offend, and you forgive. On repeat. On demand. Like a loyal servant in a house that was never yours. Machiavelli didn't write for saints. He wrote for rulers. And a ruler understands that the one thing more dangerous than hate is indifference born from familiarity. If they know you'll stay, they stop trying. If they know you'll forgive, they stop apologizing. If they know you'll always be there, they stop valuing your presence. And slowly, you become invisible. Not because you're small, but because you're predictable. The man who responds immediately is not respected, he's owned. Let that settle in. Let it sting. Because this is where your power begins, the moment you realize that being dependable to everyone is a form of self-abandonment. You see, in every psychological game, there is a silent trade being made. You think you're earning love. But you're giving up mystery. You're giving up leverage. You're giving up the very thing that makes people stop and say, "Who is this man really?" And here lies Machiavelli's hidden truth: people value what they cannot fully possess. They admire what is scarce. They respect what they cannot control. But when you are always available, emotionally, physically, mentally, you become predictable. And predictability kills curiosity. It kills desire. It kills reverence. You become an open book in a world that only treasures sealed envelopes. Every time you show up without being called for, every time you explain before being asked, every time you try to soothe tension that wasn't yours to hold, you chip away at your own enigma. And Machiavelli understood this enigma is power. He would whisper in your ear, "Be seen less, and you'll be remembered more. Speak less, and your words will thunder. Appear less often, and your presence will become a question mark they can't stop trying to answer." This is not game playing. This is sovereignty. You are not here to be summoned like a servant. You are here to command your presence like a king. So let's make it practical. Start disrupting your own patterns. Delay your response. Don't explain every move. Decline without justification. Watch how the room shifts. Watch how uncertainty awakens interest. How silence creates pressure. And when they say, "You've changed," let them. Let them feel the withdrawal they never thought they'd face. Let them sit with the discomfort of your boundaries. Let their assumptions collapse under the weight of your new reality. Because here's what no one told you: when people can no longer predict you, they start to respect you. Machiavelli would call this strategic invisibility. Not to vanish forever, but to become rare enough to matter. And if this part of you is awakening, if you feel a shift in your bones, a rising sense of "I will no longer be easy to reach," then carve this into your identity: I am no longer predictable. I am powerful. There is a moment in every man's life when silence becomes his most dangerous ally. Not when he's passive. Not when he's afraid. But when he's evolved. Machiavelli understood something that modern men have forgotten: that presence is power only when it is controlled. When it is rare. When it is earned. And when it is withdrawn, it becomes a force more piercing than any spoken word. Disappearance is not escape. It is a calculated strike. The kind that leaves the room colder, the air tighter, the silence heavier. Because when you withdraw, the performance ends. And what you leave behind is not just your absence, it's their discomfort. Think about this: when you stop replying, they don't wonder how you are. They wonder why they can't reach you. When you stop explaining, they don't admire your peace. They scramble to understand how they lost control. And when you disappear without warning, they aren't hurt by your silence. They are haunted by the power you reclaimed when you stopped asking to be seen. Strategic absence is not rejection, it's revelation. It shows them how much of you they consumed without gratitude. It shows them how entitled they became to your time, your kindness, your energy. It shows them that what they assumed would always be there was a gift, not a guarantee. Machiavelli would smile at this shift, because he knew what absence does. He wrote, "Men more often remember the absent than they respect the present." And that is the painful truth. They only remember your value when it's no longer at their fingertips. When they can't use it. When they can't summon it. You think being there for everyone proves your strength. But a man who is always there is always taken for granted. A man who is always seen becomes invisible. A man who never vanishes loses his weight. Absence builds gravity. It turns familiarity into longing. It turns dismissal into desire. And that shift, that reversal of emotional pressure, is the beginning of respect. Let them feel your absence. Let them feel the tension of no longer having access to your energy on command. Let them sit in the echo of what used to be your comfort and realize what they mistook as endless supply was a once-in-a-lifetime presence. And this is where the lesson sharpens. Respect is not built when you're available. It's built when you're missed. There is no mystery in the man who always answers. There is no power in the man who always replies. There is no sovereignty in the man who explains himself to those who never earned the truth. You want them to respect you? Stop explaining. Stop performing. Stop reacting. Withdraw. Not out of spite, but out of self-possession. Disappear, not as revenge, but as rebirth. Machiavelli would tell you, vanish to remind them that you are not theirs. Your kindness was mistaken for a leash. Your empathy became an addiction they fed on. Your presence became a pacifier. Now, it becomes a legend. Let them remember you in the silence. Let the void echo louder than your voice ever could. Because when you become scarce, you become sacred. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes that the version of himself he's been performing is no longer working. The smile that was meant to keep the peace has become a mask. The words he speaks feel foreign. His presence in rooms that once made him feel significant now leaves him hollow. And in that realization, something breaks. Machiavelli wouldn't call this a crisis. He'd call it an awakening. Most people go their entire lives without questioning the persona they wear. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we present to the world to gain acceptance, safety, and survival. But Machiavelli looked at it through a colder lens. He saw it as a tool of power when chosen, and a prison when inherited. You were trained to be agreeable, to be polite, to be liked. But no one told you that this constant performance slowly replaces your instincts with scripts. You start making choices not based on values, but based on perception. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay when your soul is begging you to leave. And the worst part? You begin to believe that this version of you is all you are. Machiavelli would call this a dangerous illusion. Because the man who believes his mask is his identity is easy to manipulate, easy to control, easy to crush. When you begin to withdraw, to stop explaining, to stop performing, you aren't just removing yourself from others, you are stripping off the armor you were forced to wear. And yes, it hurts. The silence is louder. The solitude is unfamiliar. The guilt feels unbearable. But Machiavelli would whisper, let it burn. Because in that burn is the death of the persona. And with that death comes the birth of something far more dangerous, authenticity. When you choose solitude, not as escape but as evolution, you begin to feel it, your power returning. your energy gathering, your intuition speaking again. You are no longer spending yourself to be liked. You are conserving yourself to be real. This is the collapse of the persona. And when that collapse happens, the world begins to shift around you. The people who once admired your obedience now call you selfish. The ones who praised your kindness now accuse you of being distant. But they are not reacting to who you are. They are reacting to who they can no longer control. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But Machiavelli would respond, "The power of a lifetime is to become who no one expected." Because when you step out of the role they cast you in, when you stop playing the peacekeeper, the fixer, the emotional bodyguard, you no longer serve their story. You begin to write your own. Let them call your silence arrogance. Let them call your boundaries cruelty. Let them say you've changed. Because you have. And change, real change, never asks for permission. You are no longer here to make everyone comfortable. You are here to become undeniable. Machiavelli would teach that to collapse the persona is to reclaim your narrative. You are no longer performing. You are positioning. Positioning is power. You choose when to engage, when to speak, when to act, and when to vanish. You are not moved by emotion. You are moved by strategy. You are not loud. You are precise. And in your precision, you become dangerous. Here's what they never expected, that your silence would be louder than your words. That your absence would be more impactful than your presence. That the man who once gave everything would one day give nothing without purpose. Because now, every response is an investment. Every word is currency. Every appearance is a statement. You don't owe the world your availability. You don't owe people your explanation. You owe yourself your evolution. This is how power grows in the shadows. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with applause, but with discipline. Not with validation, but with vision. You are no longer chasing the image of being good. You are cultivating the reality of being sovereign. Not to dominate others, but to be free from their dominion. The collapse of the persona is terrifying because it strips away the comfort of familiarity. But Machiavelli knew that comfort is the enemy of greatness. He knew that only in isolation could a man see the truth of who he was meant to be. So if you are in the dark right now, if you feel the ache of detachment, the tremble of letting go, the sting of being misunderstood, good. That means the mask is crumbling. That means the power is rising. And from that shadow, a new force will emerge. One that does not beg, does not chase, does not explain. One that chooses. So here is your command, let the persona die. Let the silence stretch. Let the void speak. And let your next version be so deeply aligned that no one dares question it again. If you feel that shift rising in your soul, write it in the comments. My silence is not emptiness. It is power in bloom. You've walked through fire. Not the fire that burns cities, but the fire that burns illusions. You've seen yourself clearly, the man who bled for everyone, who apologized for evolving, who traded peace for approval. And you've begun the transformation Machiavelli demands, not into a tyrant, but into a sovereign. Because nothing can hurt you now. Not the guilt they used to bait you. Not the silence they used to punish you. Not the love they gave only when it served them. You've pulled your energy back. You've disrupted the pattern. You've stepped off the stage. And now, they don't know how to reach you. Because the man they control doesn't exist anymore. Machiavelli said, "He who commands himself is more feared than he who commands an army." This isn't the end. This is your rebirth. From now on, your kindness is reserved for the worthy. Your presence is earned. Your silence is sacred. And your peace is non-negotiable. So let them gossip. Let them spiral. Let them watch from the sidelines as you walk forward, without explaining a thing. Because the man who stops apologizing becomes the man nobody dares to underestimate. underscore 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 crossed swords. If this journey changed how you see yourself, write it below. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt me again. Shield. Subscribe to Wisdom Flux, where strategy replaces noise, silence becomes power, and you never beg to be seen again. Bell. More Machiavellian lessons are coming. And when they do, you'll be ready. And here's the brutal paradox: the more you give, the less they value you. The less you appear, the more they wonder. This is not manipulation. It is emotional economics. And Machiavelli knew the market. He didn't teach cruelty. He taught leverage. He didn't promote narcissism. He promoted sovereignty. He didn't want you to disappear to cause pain. He wanted you to disappear to reclaim clarity. So let them misinterpret your absence. Let them invent reasons. Let them call it ego, selfishness, coldness. Because the man who controls his presence is the man they never stop thinking about. You are not punishing them. You are positioning yourself. And from that position, a new kind of man emerges, the man who no longer gives access without intention. The man who no longer answers out of guilt. The man who no longer explains his evolution. He appears when he chooses. He speaks when it matters. And when he vanishes, it is not an absence. It is an event. So the next time they expect you to show up, don't. Not to hurt. Not to confuse. But to declare, I am not a resource. I am a force. Let the silence stretch. Let the discomfort build. Let your stillness say what your words never could. Because here lies the Machiavellian truth: a man who disappears without warning is more powerful than a man who begs to be seen. If you've ever felt like your presence was expected, not appreciated. If you've ever felt like your energy was consumed without gratitude. If you've ever felt like disappearing just to breathe again. Then say this aloud: my absence will teach what my presence could not. And if they come looking for the old you, tell them, he disappeared. The king returned. There comes a moment when silence doesn't just protect your peace, it shatters their illusion. When you stop explaining, justifying, or giving energy to those who feed on your compliance, something remarkable happens. Their mask begins to crack. They used to smile when they saw you coming. They knew they could count on your presence, your kindness, your yes. They praised you for being dependable, for always showing up. But what they were really praising wasn't your character, it was their control over you. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He knew that loyalty without limits is not love. It's leverage. And when you remove yourself from that dynamic, not with an explosion, not with a fight, but with a quiet, intentional absence, you trigger a reaction louder than any confrontation ever could. Because people don't panic when you yell. They panic when you disappear. They'll call it betrayal. They'll say you've changed. They'll rewrite history to make themselves the victim of your silence. But don't flinch. Don't step back in to soothe them. That chaos isn't yours anymore. That mask they wore, the one that made them seem stable, kind, or even loving, it starts to slip the moment you stop dancing to their emotional rhythm. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And your silence forces them to face it. The people who depended on your predictability, on your quick replies, on your endless willingness to explain yourself, they crumble when that routine is broken. Because it wasn't really about you. It was about what they got from you. Your emotional labor. Your self-betrayal. Your compliance. Your peace. Machiavelli would call this the collapse of the persona, the unraveling of the mask they wore to feel powerful in your presence. And when that persona begins to fall apart, they don't blame themselves. They blame your distance. But that distance, that silence, that space you've created, it isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's the emergence of a man who no longer trades his dignity for the illusion of connection. It's the evolution of someone who's finally realized that peace isn't found in pleasing everyone. Peace is found in protecting what's sacred within yourself. And what begins to surface when you disappear is the truth: who respected you only when you served them, who called you selfish the moment you prioritized your well-being, who loved the version of you that was silent, agreeable, and easy to control. They don't want the real you. They want the version of you that makes their life easier. So let the silence stretch. Let the distance widen. Let their illusion fall apart without your rescue. Because if someone cannot love you without access to your sacrifice, it was never love, it was possession. Machiavelli knew the real power of withdrawal. He knew that when a man removes himself from the battlefield, it doesn't mean he's lost. It means he's watching, calculating, waiting for the terrain to shift in his favor. You are not running away. You are not weak. You are reclaiming your position. You are no longer their emotional supply. You are no longer the man who explains, apologizes, or absorbs their chaos. You are the man who sees the cracks in their mask and chooses not to fix it. That is the collapse. That is the reckoning. That is the moment they realize they never had power over you. They only had access. And access can be revoked. Watch how they react when they can't read you. Watch what happens when your silence echoes louder than your explanations ever did. They will accuse. They will manipulate. They will try to bait you back into their narrative. But here's the secret: don't return to what you had to heal from. Because this isn't just about them. This is about the man you're becoming. The one who doesn't explain himself to people committed to misunderstanding him. The one who doesn't sacrifice peace for proximity. The one who lets the old dynamic collapse so he can rise without it. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the wounded, fragmented parts of the self into something solid. Machiavelli would call it strategic sovereignty, the art of reclaiming your throne, even if you have to sit on it alone for a while. So let them talk. Let them guess. Let them craft stories about who you are now. You owe no one a role in your rebirth. Let the mask fall. Let the game end. Let the man you used to be die so the man you're becoming can finally breathe. And if you feel this shift deep in your chest, if the silence feels less like loss and more like liberation, then write this in the comments: their mask collapsed when I disappeared. Because that is the power of withdrawal. That is the strength of absence. That is the collapse of the illusion. In every kingdom, the most guarded resource isn't gold. It's power. And in your kingdom, that power is your psychological energy. The thoughts you think. The emotions you feel. The time you give. But what no one tells you is this: most men are bleeding out from battles they never needed to fight. Not because they lost a war, but because they never realized they were in one. Machiavelli would not call this burnout. He would call it strategic failure. The failure to guard your energy, to recognize distraction as a weapon, to understand that every battle you step into has a cost. Every conversation you entertain. Every insult you defend. Every problem you inherit that was never yours to begin with. These are not neutral exchanges. They are energy transactions. And like any transaction, you pay a price. You think you're being noble by explaining yourself. By clarifying your intentions. By managing the emotional storms of those around you. But what you're really doing is allowing your psychological fortress to be raided. Day after day. Leak after leak. Until there's nothing left but exhaustion disguised as kindness. Carl Jung said, every emotional reaction is a withdrawal from the self. But Machiavelli goes even further. He would say, every unnecessary reaction is a surrender of control. Because the man who cannot control his attention will have it stolen. And once it's stolen, so is his influence. Look around. You're being baited. Pulled into arguments that serve no purpose. Manipulated by people who feed off your reactions. Trained to believe that if you don't respond, you're weak. But here's the Machiavellian truth: he who speaks first loses the frame. He who reacts loses control. You were never meant to fight every fire. You were meant to choose your flames, to calculate, to conserve, to strike only when the outcome justifies the cost. Because not all resistance is noble. Sometimes it's just noise. When you react without reflection, you leak energy. When you argue with fools, you feed their fantasy. When you give your presence to those who haven't earned it, you bankrupt your own influence. And Machiavelli would not pity you. He would say, the man who gives freely is not generous. He is unguarded. And unguarded men are not admired. They are devoured. So how do you stop bleeding? Withdraw. Not from life, but from chaos. From senseless obligations. From the emotional warfare disguised as conversation. From the people who seek not clarity, but control. You do not owe your reaction to anyone. You do not owe your explanation to anyone. You do not owe your energy to anyone who wouldn't bleed for your peace the way you've bled for theirs. Machiavelli believed in tactical silence. He understood that when your enemy cannot read your face, they cannot read your next move. And that's the greatest threat of all. When you stop reacting, they panic. When you stop explaining, they spiral. When you stop showing up to perform your old role, they feel the power shift. And it is a shift. Because power is not in how loud you speak, but how little you need to. It's not in how much you do for others, but how unapologetically you preserve yourself. You've been told that energy is love. That presence is connection. That availability is proof of loyalty. But that is a lie told by those who benefit from your exhaustion. Your energy is not free. It is gold. It is kingdom. It is your crown. From this moment forward, treat it as such. The next time someone tries to bait you with drama, with guilt, with manipulation masked as urgency, pause. Ask yourself, is this worth the kingdom I've built inside? And if the answer is anything less than a full-bodied yes, withdraw. Not to punish. Not to play games. But to protect the only currency that truly belongs to you. Because here's the Machiavellian law no one dares speak aloud: the man who controls his energy controls his empire. Let them rant. Let them twist the narrative. Let them choke on the silence you no longer break. You don't need to burn bridges. Just stop crossing them. You don't need to shut doors. Just stop answering the knocks. You don't need to fight for your space. Just stop renting it to anyone who doesn't respect the cost. Your psychological energy is your throne. Guard it. Sit on it. And never again rise to explain why it's yours. If this truth hits something inside you that has long felt robbed, drained, stolen from, then write it down: my energy is no longer for sale.